Ukraine has an F-16 problem. When these US-made fighter jets started arriving in Ukraine back in August 2024, many hailed them as a game changer. They've certainly been important. Ukraine uses its F-16s to defend against Russia's aerial assaults and is even using them to attack Russian positions. However, Ukraine has also lost some of its F-16s, and it knows, due to its own experiences targeting Russia's aircraft when they're stationed on the ground, that these valuable aerial platforms are vulnerable even when they're not in flight. At least, they were. That's all changed as an almost magical trick has just made Ukraine's F-16s practically untouchable when they're not in the skies. On July 26, the Kyiv Independent reported that Ukraine's ever-growing fleet of F-16s has received what it called a badly needed boost, thanks to the creation of new equipment designed to service the fighter jets while they're on the ground. Specifically, Ukraine has gotten its hands on new mobile maintenance and operation modules that will help it to prevent its most valuable aerial platforms from being targeted by Russia's ballistic missiles while they're on the ground. This new equipment will be key to improving the survival rate of Ukraine's F-16s. That's according to Peter Layton, who's a former Royal Australian Air Force officer and an associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute. There is only a short time lag between finding the F-16s and then launching ballistic missiles. The key to F-16 survival when on the ground is not being found, Layton told the Kyiv Independent. And he has a point. Ukraine's biggest problem with its F-16s is that they require a massive amount of crew and equipment to maintain them when they're not in the skies. In 2024, The Guardian said that Dutch Air Force Commander General Arnoud Stormen points out that a single F-16 needs at least 10 crew members to keep it operational. That amounts to up to 2 pilots and around 8 people on the ground, who are constantly communicating with the pilot and looking after the jet. Add other maintenance personnel to that list, and the result is what amounts to a stock problem. Ukraine needs a lot of people and equipment to keep its F-16s in the air. There are only so many Ukrainian airfields that are capable of playing host to those people and equipment. Russia knows this, and Ukraine has had to labor under the possibility that Vladimir Putin's forces could strike one of the airfields housing its F-16s with ballistic missiles. That hasn't happened. Yet. Putin is more concerned with launching aerial strikes against Ukraine's civilians and cities than he is with hitting military targets. The 6,754 Ukrainian civilians that the United Nations reports have been killed or injured during the first 6 months of 2025 proves that. But strikes against Ukraine's limited collection of F-16 friendly airfields is always a possibility. That's where the magical trick created by Ukraine's new mobile maintenance and operation units comes into play. Layton reveals that these 2 new pieces of equipment are a game changer for Ukraine's F-16s. They open up the use of less likely airfields, such as short and civilian airstrips, or remote parts of large military air bases, Layton tells the Kyiv Independent, before adding, the F-16s are then widely dispersed, so if one is found and targeted, not all will be destroyed. It's a shell game. This is a game that Ukraine intends to win, and its new vehicles are going to help it do just that, which leads to the obvious question, just what are these magical vehicles that Ukraine has just gotten its hands on? The first is what the Kyiv Independent dubs a mobile complex, into which are built a pair of maintenance modules that allow Ukraine to transport the equipment it needs to service its F-16s to almost any airfield in the country. These mobile maintenance complexes include a workroom Ukraine can use to prepare an F-16's weaponry, along with a pair of vans that are used to attach munitions to the fighter jet. There's also a crew transportation truck within the mobile complex, ensuring that Ukraine always has the right engineers at the right time to conduct F-16 maintenance. The War Zone, or TWZ, provides a few more details about the mobile maintenance complex. It says that the workshop trucks are 4x4s that have been specially designed to aid with preparing and testing aviation weaponry. The other maintenance trucks are also 4x4s, though they've been kitted out with special cranes that make it easier to attach munitions to a fighter jet. Additional personnel are transported in what appears to be a pickup truck made by France's Peugeot auto manufacturer. As for the other 4x4 vehicles, TWC says that they appear to be based on the daily 4x4 series of vehicles produced by Italy's Iveco. But here's the most important thing. Mentioned earlier was that a single F-16 requires a crew of 10 people, with the Kyiv Independent noting that the crew could include as many as 12 when munitions are being loaded. Ukraine's new mobile maintenance complexes cut that per F-16 crew requirement down to just 3 specialists. Don't underestimate how massive this is for Ukraine. It'll no longer need to maintain large collections of crew members at airfields that could be easily targeted by Russia's ballistic missiles. Now, those crews are mobile. They're able to travel between airfields along with all of the equipment they need to service an F-16, wherever the jet may be. This reverses the static target situation that Leighton pointed out to the Kyiv Independent. Now, Ukraine's F-16s and the people who maintain them don't have to stay in one place. They've become moving targets that are far more difficult for Russia to track and destroy. And the fact that each of these mobile complexes only needs 3 crew members instead of between 10 and 12, and that's another massive advantage. As grim as it is to suggest, Russia could still get lucky and hit one of these complexes. If that happens, Ukraine only loses 3 F-16 maintenance personnel instead of the 10 to 12 it might have lost in a ballistic missile strike on one of its air bases. Ukraine essentially gets to make better and more efficient use of its human resources thanks to these trucks. That point will return in a moment. For now, it's worth switching focus to the second new vehicle that's helping to make Ukraine's F-16s virtually invisible to Russia. Dubbed the Mission Planning Complex, this vehicle is a German-made 6x6 truck that hauls a 4x4 trailer. Inside the truck are workstations for up to 7 people who work to support ongoing mission planning and similar tasks on behalf of the F-16's pilot. Pilots can enter the vehicle to receive their pre-mission briefings, and there are suggestions that the trailer even contains sleeping quarters where the crew can stay if there are no established facilities on the ground. Think of it as the most high-tech camper van that's ever been created. And like the maintenance complex, it has the key benefit of being mobile. That means Ukraine's operational crews can drive to wherever they need to be, perhaps with a pilot in tow, do their work, and then get out of Dodge as soon as the F-16 is in the skies. Operationally, this also means that a Ukrainian F-16 can now head out for a mission from one makeshift base and then land at another, making it even harder for Russia to detect where it is on the ground. The maintenance and mission planning complexes can get moving as soon as the F-16 is in the skies, arriving at the landing destination ready for whatever they need to do next. That's where the trick lies. Ukraine's new trucks haven't made its F-16s impossible to destroy in the literal sense. If Russia can track one of the jets in the skies and hit it with a missile, the F-16 is still going down. What these mobile complexes do is ensure that Ukraine's jets will always be on the move. Russia no longer has a set number of airfields it could target with ballistic missiles to take out Ukraine's F-16s. The entire country is now open to Ukraine because its F-16s can now be supported by crews that are constantly on the move. And all of this raises the question of where this latest brilliant Ukrainian innovation comes from. The Kyiv Independent says that the mobile F-16 complexes are the brainchild of both Ukraine's defense ministry and a charity foundation named Come Back Alive. Taras Chmut, who's the director of Come Back Alive, has plenty to say about his organization's clever solution to one of Ukraine's biggest F-16 challenges. This project became the foundation's first, focused on working with the F-16. Here we solved 2 tasks. The first is a mobile mission planning command post. The second is preparation for the use of aviation weapons, Chmut says in a statement released on the Come Back Alive website. The aircraft received by Ukraine appeared and existed in a closed ecosystem. They were not used the way we use them. Ours operate under the conditions of a full-scale war, with constant sorties and continuous Russians hunting for the aircraft. That's an interesting point. The US designed its F-16s to operate out of vast airfields all over the world. That's never been a problem in the past. While it's inaccurate to say that these airfields could never become targets for an enemy combatant, they certainly would never have to face the sort of attritional warfare Putin has waged on Ukraine for over 3 years. Sustained bombing campaigns of airfields located in a relatively small country are things that the US and other users of the F-16s haven't had to worry about before. As Chmut says, the jets have never been deployed in an active war zone quite like the one seen in Ukraine. Chmut isn't the only person to point this out. TWZ notes that retired US Air Force General James Hecker made a similar point when speaking at the Airspace Forces Association Warfare Symposium back in March. Hecker recounted how he often speaks to Ukraine's air chief, who explained that Ukraine avoids having aircraft hit on the ground by never taking off and landing at the same airfield. This approach requires high mobility and places logistical demands on support infrastructure, such as pre-positioning equipment and planning for short-term stays at dispersed bases. That highlights something that, while not a design flaw in the F-16 ecosystem, is certainly something that the US didn't account for when building the jets. Another US Air Force member, Major General Joseph Kunkel, noted the same problem when speaking to the Hudson Institute think tank earlier in 2025. When you think about the sustainment architectures that we built in the past, the thought was that they were going to be in sanctuary. So, you could afford to build a piece of aircraft ground equipment that weighed 10,000 pounds and wouldn't fit on a C-130. Kunkel was speaking about C-130 aircraft in this speech, but the underlying concept remains the same. The US designs its aircraft under the impression that bases large enough to service them will always be available. That's not the case in Ukraine. At least, Ukraine can't keep its F-16s in a single base without risking a Russian attack. Enter Come Back Alive's brilliant solution. So this unique technical solution, which we implemented with the domestic defense industry and with the support of UKR NAFTA, is based on real needs in a real war. We will continue to accompany this track and, if necessary, adapt the developments to other aircraft that Ukraine will receive. That's a message to Putin. Ukraine has come up with a way to protect its F-16s from Russia's ballistic missiles while they're on the ground. And Come Back Alive says that it will come up with similar innovations for any other aerial platforms Ukraine might receive from its allies in the future. Oh, and there's another aspect of this brilliant new system of mobile complexes that hasn't been covered yet: the cost. One might assume that the small fleet of trucks and trailers that Come Back Alive has worked alongside Ukraine's defense ministry to create has cost an arm and a leg. After all, these aren't any old trucks. They're packed with workstations and equipment needed to maintain and support F-16s. Surely they must be very expensive. Not really. TWZ reports that the collection of 10 vehicles, along with all of the technical equipment that's loaded into them, costs 51,354,554 Ukrainian hryvnia. That amounts to roughly $1.23 million. For context, the US Air Force website says that a single F-16 costs between $14.6 million and $18.8 million, depending on the model, back in 1998. The costs will have only risen since then thanks to inflation, and that's without accounting for the costs involved in loading a jet with munitions and training the pilots who are flying Ukraine's F-16s. In return for a $1.23 million investment, Ukraine will get a massive return because it massively reduces the risks its far more expensive aerial platforms face when they're on the ground. And that leads to the impact that Ukraine's new mobile complexes will have. The main benefit of these new mobile complexes has already been touched upon. They ensure that Ukraine doesn't have to rely on a fairly small collection of airfields for F-16 maintenance and operations. Those airfields need to be large and well maintained to be able to handle the aircraft's weight and provide the jet with reinforced hangars that will protect it from attack. That's not to mention all of the maintenance equipment that needs protecting too. With these mobile complexes, Ukraine can retain its main F-16 operating bases while opening up the ability to use dozens of smaller air bases throughout the country. With increased uncertainty and reduced probability of successful targeting, Russia's going to have a much more difficult time trying to figure out which airbase is being used. The F-16s and their mobile maintenance and operational complexes will keep bouncing between a much larger collection of bases than ever before. And even if Russia does hit the main F-16 operational bases with ballistic missiles, it can no longer be sure that an F-16 will even be in one of those bases. Plus, the loss of a main base won't stop Ukraine from sending its F-16s into the skies. And add to this the risk reduction factor. Come Back Alive's fleet of intelligent trucks allows Ukraine's technicians to carry out safer and faster F-16 maintenance than ever before. This was previously touched upon in terms of crew volumes, which are much lower thanks to these trucks than they would be at a traditional base. A representative of Office 61, which is the department with which Come Back Alive worked to create the vehicles, points this out. The need for such a complex arose due to the extensive system of aircraft basing and the lack of specialists. The implementation of this project will significantly increase the Air Force's ability to destroy the enemy, the representative says. Chomut adds, in conditions of limited time for the full deployment of infrastructure for the F-16, the most rational solution is to invest in a mobile ecosystem. It will allow for the maximum use of the capabilities of the most complex Western equipment already now during a modern war where efficiency and speed affect its course. It all adds up to one thing. Ukraine now has the ability to get its F-16s into the air faster, and once they're on the ground, fix them more efficiently so they can go back to doing damage to Russia's forces. But there's another part of Ukraine's F-16 story that proves just how important these new mobile complexes will be. The sad fact is that Ukraine only has a limited number of F-16s, and it's being forced to wait a good while before it receives all of the aerial platforms that have been promised to it. According to Newsweek, about 85 F-16s have been promised to Ukraine, almost all of which are coming from a European consortium that was created to facilitate the arrival of these US-made aircraft into Ukraine. Denmark, Norway, Belgium and the Netherlands have all committed F-16s, though as of July 1st, Newsweek says it's unclear precisely how many of the 85 Ukraine is supposed to be getting have actually arrived in the country. Denmark has delivered 12 of the 19 it's promised, though it hasn't provided any details on what's happening with the other 7. The Netherlands said in May that all of the 24 F-16s it's promised have now left the country, though it's unclear how many of those 24 are in Ukraine versus those awaiting transport into the country. Norway won't comment on how many jets it's already donated, though it says it will send 6 F-16s to Ukraine by the end of 2025. As for Belgium, it's committed to delivering 30 F-16s to Ukraine by 2028. Again, it's unclear how many of those 30 have arrived as of the end of July 2025. The point here is that Ukraine doesn't have 85 F-16s in its arsenal. It has a promise for 85 and an unknown number that are currently operational. Therein lies a problem for Ukraine. Though it's not presently known precisely how many F-16s it has versus how many have been promised to it, Russia has enjoyed some success in taking Ukraine's F-16s out. In August 2024, just a few weeks after receiving its first shipment of F-16s, Ukraine confirmed that it had lost one of them amidst a barrage of Russian missiles. The jet was helping to defend Ukraine's cities from yet another of Putin's massive aerial assaults, with the pilot taking out numerous missiles and at least one drone before he was forced to crash. It's believed that the crash wasn't caused by a direct missile strike, at least according to the Ukrainian military. Perhaps there was a technical issue involved. Still, the outcome was that Ukraine had lost one of its limited number of F-16s. A second F-16 went down on April 12, said to have fallen victim to a long-range 40 N6 surface-to-air missile that managed to strike the aircraft deep inside Ukrainian-controlled airspace, according to Military Watch magazine. The same outlet also reported that Ukraine lost another of its F-16s during a May 16 engagement against Russian drones and cruise missiles. And on June 29, another of Ukraine's F-16s crashed while defending Ukraine against another of Russia's massive drone and missile strikes. All of these F-16s were destroyed during active operations. Still, the point is that Ukraine has lost some of what it considers vital aircraft in its defense against Putin's invasion. It can't afford to lose any more. The new mobile maintenance and operational complexes that Ukraine is now able to deploy mitigate the risk of loss drastically. Not only do they make Ukraine's jets harder to hit when they're on the ground, but they also allow Ukraine to make use more of its airfields to accommodate its fighter jets. In the future, that may mean that an F-16 that might otherwise have crashed will be able to land safely rather than desperately attempting to avoid Russian missiles and drones. And it's not just F-16s that are helping Ukraine to gain control over its own skies. Ukraine was supposed to lose the sky battle, but it's come roaring back with rising sky power that is breaking Russia's back. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more videos covering the latest developments in the Ukraine war.